Well, let's begin. Let me welcome everyone to the Future Trends Forum. I'm very glad to see you all here. Today, we have a very important report with two excellent guests I'm very excited about. I should introduce myself. I'm Brian Alexander. I'm your MC and cat herder for the hour. And I'm, again, delighted to see everybody here. But before we begin with our conversation, let's describe how the forum came about and what it does. So to begin with, you should know that the forum is the discussion-based wing of the Future Trends in Technology and Education report. That's a monthly trends analysis that takes a look at major developments in education and technology. It's been going for a little bit more than 5 years, and we have about 83 trends that we track. So we have a good sense of where certain developments have been going, and we can extrapolate as to where they may end up. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, go to ftte.us, download a few sample copies, and subscribe. Now, another thing about this is that we have a discussion here. This is based on not presentation, but in conversation. And it's important that we think about the future of education, that we think about these conversations happening at a global level. We can't afford to be constrained to an individual nation or a state or a region. So it's really important to think about how we can include participation from around the world. And you'll see from this next slide that we've had participants from just about every continent in the world, from all over North America to South America, from all over Europe, Central and East Asia, Middle East, and Australia. We'll have more of this to come, but I want to make sure that everyone thinks about this as we try to imagine where education could be going, that it definitely happens on a global stage. Now, this stage that we're on now is only possible thanks to a couple of wonderful sponsors and a team of sponsors that I want to celebrate. So to begin with, we want to show our thanks to NYSERDAT from New York State. This is a nonprofit that helps connect colleges, museums, libraries, and universities to the internet. We're grateful to NYSERDAT for their support. We're also grateful to Shindig because Shindig provides us with, well, this wonderful technology. And just before we go further, let me just quickly show you where all the bells and whistles are for today. So to begin with, where I am, and where these slides very briefly will be, is called the stage. This is where everybody can see us, everyone can hear us. And this is where our guests will be in just a couple of seconds. And this is where all of you who want to come here and join us can join us. Now below us is all of you, the audience wing, the participant swarm. If you look there, you can see either silhouettes or static pictures or images or video feeds. So you can take a look, say, for example, at the very nattily dressed Tom Hames, who is trying not to look like we're paying attention to him. And if each one of those represents one person or one side, if you'd like to talk to somebody, you simply double click on their icon. And if they want to talk to you, your two icons will double click together, just like Lego bricks, and you can have your own private audiovisual bubble conversation. Now, there are a lot of ways to communicate, and this is a discussion-oriented platform. So let me just show you the three major ways to use connections here on Shindig. If you look at the bottom of the screen, I mentioned one of them. So if you look at the very bottom of the screen, there's a white strip that has a series of icons on it. The very leftmost one tells you how many people are here right now. We just clicked over to 34. To the right of that is a text icon. If you click that, it pops up a chat box where you can say hello to people. So most recently, we just had Gardner Campbell, Frederick Shears, and Rachel Fishman all say hello. You can use this for whatever you like. I like to use it to have people introduce themselves, but also you can have informal conversation going along. So if you have questions or comments, you can surface them there. Now, if you'd like to ask a question and you'd like to come up on stage and join us, it's really, really easy to do. Also on that white strip down below is a raised hand icon. Click that, and that'll tell us you want to join us. So if your mic is working, your camera is working, click that. We'll put you in line, and we'll beam you up on stage as soon as we can. Now, if you're shy, or if your mic and camera don't work, or if you're in a crowded environment, that's all right. You can type a question. In between the text chat and the raised hand icon is a question mark. If you click that, you can type in a question or comment, and we can flash it on the screen, and I'll read it out loud. So you have three ways to share your thoughts, ideas, reflections, comments, and questions. Please use whichever one of those makes sense for you. Now, besides Shindig, besides NYSERDAT, I want to thank one other entity that has helped make this possible, which is our friends on Patreon. And this is a crowdfunding work which allows anybody to support someone who's doing creative work. So if you go to Brian Alexander, patreon.com/Brian Alexander, you get to see dozens of people who are contributing to keep this work and the future of education going. If you haven't had a chance, please go there and contribute whatever you can. Everything you can contribute is greatly appreciated. Now, that's what we're doing. That's where we came from. Let me introduce today's two guests. We have Manuela Ekowo and Rachel Fishman. Now, I'm especially happy for both of these guys for a lot of reasons. One is that the New America work in education is really, really important. It's very influential, very thoughtful, very timely, and we should all be paying attention to it. Another is that Manuela is a repeat guest. We had her here last year. She was a fantastic guest talking about her work. We're glad to see her. Rachel, I'm also glad to see because this is her first time. So let me welcome both of you guys. And if you're new to Shindig, you can see the two of them being teleported up on stage. Hello, Manuela. Hello, Rachel.
Hi.
Oh, so good to see both of you. Welcome.
Good to see you.
You're both in DC right now?
Oh yeah, we're like a couple of offices away from each other.
wait, be careful, may get some echo back and forth. Or you could do one of those fun things where one of you could just like pass a cup to the other can like, pick it up from the rest.
I should have planned this a little bit better.
Oh, good, a lot of fun with this. Let me ask the most important question about DC right now, which is it still hot and humid, or has the temperature begun to cool off?
It's begun to cool off finally.
Oh, good. Good. Well, that's an important thing. If you haven't been to DC in the summer, it's pretty hot.
Don't come in the summer. Do not
I come all year round. I can't help it. But
come in the fall. A beautiful fall.
Well, glad to be invited. Thank you very much. Let me just, before we proceed, before we dive into your report, let me just ask you quickly if you can both just say a few words about what it is that you do with New America.
Sure. New America, if people are unfamiliar with it, it's a think tank. We're located in DC. You might be familiar with some of the programs that exist within New America, like the Open Technology Institute. We also have the Better Life Lab, the Asset Building Program. We also have a robust Fellows Program. So the Fellows Program usually are a bunch of journalists and other authors who come in residence, and they're working on various book projects. The education policy program where Manuela and I work, we span the spectrum really from early education, so we're talking really, really young children, all the way from birth, because we know education starts at birth. And we go through pre-K all the way through K-12 into higher education and the workforce. We actually have a program dedicated to the workforce called the Center for Education and Skills at New America. I'm Deputy Director for Research with the Higher Education Initiative. With the Higher Education Initiative, we're working to make higher education more accessible, student-focused, and equitable. In my current work, along with the work we're going to discuss today, which is really focused on America's opinion about higher education and the value of a higher education, also involves a lot of federal financial aid work and improving financial aid for especially non-traditional students. So for example, we have a project where we're trying to help build better financial aid award letters in conjunction with You Aspire, especially for low-income students. I'm also working on a blog series that should come out in the fall about student givers in higher education. So 1/4 of all students in higher education are caring for a child, and they have unique needs in the higher education landscape. And then another program I'm working on is intergenerational debt and the equity implications of the federal Parent Plus loan. So I sort of have a bunch of projects that span a spectrum of work.
An awful lot of work. Well, I'm glad that you're doing it. I look forward to following what you do next. Thank you, Rachel. Manuela, what are you working on these days?
Sure. Hi, Brian. It's great to be back. Thanks for having us. I'm a policy analyst here at New America, and in addition to working with Rachel Fishman on the public opinion research, which we'll talk about today, I also focus on policies related to innovations in higher education, including the use of technology, predictive and learning analytics, open educational resources, and how we can utilize all these tools to ensure equitable outcomes for underrepresented students.
between the two of you, it sounds like you're an armada of people. Each of you are covering topics that for normal mortals would be a team. I'm so glad to be able to connect with you. And friends, make sure that we have that you ready your questions because I have a stack of them. But I'd like to make sure that you all feel free to chime in. To begin, I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to this study, which is the main reason that we're here today, which is a fantastic work. That this is really a look at how Americans think about higher education. And it's a very deep study. It cuts across a whole series of different angles and aspects. It's called Varying Degrees, and we have links to it, and you can find as much as you want online about it. The whole paper is online in PDF and web form. Let me ask you both, if I could start with, what surprised you the most about your findings? When you got all the data in and you're crunching it all, what was the most surprising result you found?
I think for me, the most surprising result, and we focused a lot on the narrative in the paper on generations, especially because I think when we talk about higher education, we talk a lot about millennials right now. And millennials is a very buzzy topic. But as it turns out, I'm a millennial and I'm starting to be in my mid-30s. And I think a lot of people, when they think of millennials, they think of the youngest generation. But as it turns out, millennials are now getting older and older. And there is another generation that we are calling Generation Z. We actually don't know what that generation is called yet. But the generation that's currently in higher education is arguably a different generation than millennials. And they're going to have a whole host of concerns that are different and similar to, but different than millennials. So when we broke out the data about millennials, I think one of our most shocking findings overall that was that only 1 in 4 Americans think higher education is fine the way it is. Now, more must be done to unpack this. That was just how we asked the question. We don't have any follow-up. We're hoping to do focus groups. We're hoping to maybe get some more input next year when we run this survey, but it was concerning. So 1 in 4 people don't think it's operating okay the way it's currently structured, or it's just not fine the way it is. But when you break that out into how millennials feel, so these in our survey were people ages 23 to 37, they believed that only 1 in 10 believed higher education was fine the way it is. And that was a significant finding. It was really low compared to that 1 in 4. And interestingly, millennials are set up to be the most educated generation so far. They're the ones who are going to have the most experience with higher education. And because of that, they were in higher education either right before or during the Great Recession. And they also entered a really difficult job market. I feel like I'm living, even just talking about it, it's bringing up memories of when I graduated. And so I think it's just interesting to think, what is it about millennials where they don't think higher education is fine the way it is? What would they like to change about it?
Yeah, so I would agree with Rachel in that. I think one of the most surprising findings we found was the 1 in 4 Americans think higher ed is fine the way it is. I think that if you're following the higher education beat, or you're following in any fashion the news, there's stories coming out of colleges and universities about the cost of college, about students not graduating, about various things that students and parents alike are not happy with how their students or their children are experiencing a college education. But I think it's really important and interesting that we now have like a number. We can quantify the kind of dissatisfaction. I wasn't expecting it to be that low, but that was surprising to me. I think another surprising finding was how well, in comparison to other institutions or sectors, the community colleges came out.
Yes.
The public seems to really think that they're doing a good job by their students while they're students, and even after they've completed their studies. So I thought that was another surprise to me, because again, community colleges kind of occupy this very strange place in the higher ed system, where people don't always remember that they do educate almost half of students, and they provide a quality education and quality credentials that have value in the labor market. So again, that was really good, and I think important to be able to quantify with, at least with public opinion data.
Well, these are two major findings, and I just want to make sure that everyone grabs these. One is that, as Rachel pointed out, that we have this huge, well, I guess I would say dissatisfaction about higher education among millennials. Rachel, if I just quickly ask, what year did you graduate?
2007.
Oh, almost perfect. Wow.
I know. Yeah. And I took like a year off where I was lucky enough to go to France and teach English for a year because I was a French major. So I did enter the labor market in like 2 months before the recession really got bad in October. So it was an interesting time to enter the labor market.
En français, on dit quelle catastrophe, oui?
Yeah, exactement.
And then, and Manuela, and what you're describing is, I think, so powerful in trying to understand where this goes right now. Let me, I mean, if I could dwell on that for a second, one of the findings that really surprised me, just personally in your report, was this gap between, at least if I have this right, between privates and for-profits on the one hand, and publics, including community colleges, on the other. So I was really stunned by that. I mean, it seemed that, again, maybe I'm getting this wrong, correct me if I am, but that Americans in general, across the generations, really seem much more fond of public higher education, including community colleges, and pretty skeptical about for-profits and privates. Is that right? And if that's right, what do you think about this?
I'm not sure I would say that people are really skeptical of private and for-profits. They just don't feel as positive, it seems, compared to the public sector. So it's not necessarily that they're feeling full-on negative about private nonprofits and for-profits. But you do see like a dramatic, if you look at the data, you just see this dramatic drop-off of about, people are like, yes, I could totally see myself going to a community college or a four-year school, and then it begins to drop off. And then especially when you say, is it affordable, it really drops off, which makes a lot of sense. To be honest, I think this was, like Manuela said, one of our more interesting findings, namely because I think if you had asked this same question 10 years ago, my hypothesis would be that, I don't know if we would have gotten the same answers. For-profits were really on the rise. They hadn't really had the huge downfall that we've seen over the past few years, where there's been a lot of litigation, and not only litigation, because that's always happened in that sector, collapse of large for-profit entities like IT trying to avail themselves of getting their loans discharged. So there's been a lot in the news lately and over the past few years, as a lot of focus has been on that sector. I'm also not sure, similarly, if you'd asked this question 10 years ago, if community colleges would have been viewed as positively either. And my hypothesis there is that as states have disinvested continually from their institutions of higher education, not only are private institutions expensive, but also public four-year institutions are expensive. So really, I think for a lot of students and their families, the public two-year institutions are seen as the most affordable option if you want a higher education. I think as articulation agreements between the 2- and 4-year sectors have gotten better and more prevalent, I think a lot of people see the 2-year sector as maybe a place for me to start out, even if they don't want to get an associate's degree. Maybe they want to go on and get their bachelor's degree. So yes, it's a place for me to eventually end up with my bachelor's degree. So we didn't really dig into that. That would be something interesting to find out. I also wonder if there's something at play with the free college programs that are happening at the state level right now. A lot of the free college programs, the community colleges play a central role, where sometimes that free college is only eligible at the community college level in those states. And so I don't know if it's bringing a different sort of prestige to the sector of, you could get a very affordable 2 years of your education, even if you want a bachelor's degree, and you can go on and get that degree in an affordable way. So I'm sort of wondering if that's what's going on there. In terms of the private nonprofits, I think some of the programs we listed, because, in survey research, one of the hardest things to do is even figure out if people understand the difference between a public 4-year, a public 2-year, and then especially once you get to the private sector, having them understand the difference between a private for-profit and a private nonprofit can get complicated. And so we did provide examples in each category to make sure people, understood what we were asking. And for profits, for example, we use the University of Phoenix. For nonprofits, we use institutions like Harvard and Stanford, because we were trying to pick something that, a lot of the general public would have some knowledge of. So I almost wonder if the fact that we use such prestigious universities as examples maybe could have made people think, well, those are really expensive and they're definitely not for people like me. So again, whenever you do something in year 1, you always think of what can we do better in year 2, or how can we ask things in year 2 that we get the data that's in the most useful way to report on. And that's something that I think we should consider moving forward in year 2.
So this is the first year of a multi-year study.
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Then this is especially exciting because we really get to be on the ground floor as you start growing this. I have some more questions, but we have a video question from one of our forum members. This is Tom. Can we beam you up on stage? Hello, Tom.
Can you hear me?
Tom, I have to say, yes. Before I say anything, I just want to make sure that, please, my best wishes to your family and to your colleagues. Tom is in Houston, and obviously they're suffering quite a bit from water. So our best wishes with you.
Yeah, we're high and dry, and we got lucky in the storm. We only made it halfway up the driveway, but not everybody was that lucky, and we're trying to help out our friends who are been less lucky. I just got notice that another friend got run out of her house. The waters are still rising in some areas.
Wow, still.
But back to the topic. Yeah, no, because it's got to force its way through all the systems, the bayous and everything. And Houston is basically flat, so the distance from Katy, vertical distance from Katy, where we live, to the ocean is only 140 feet, and that's 70 miles. So you can think about the plain there and all that water having to force its way down. But back to the topic at hand, I wanted to ask if you guys had talked to the students about the issue of relevancy and how, whether they thought higher education was giving them the relevant tools necessary for the workforce, and alternatively, if they were looking at other sources for acquiring those skills and tools outside of higher education.
A great question. Who wants to tackle that, Rachel or Manuela?
I mean, we didn't focus too much on the workforce. We did ask about each sector and whether or not they were preparing students for a strong American workforce. And our sample wasn't just students. We did have an oversampling of undergraduate students, but our sample was general population. So we did ask, how are each of these sectors preparing students for the workforce? And pretty much every sector got high marks. In addition, there was a Pew survey that came out last year, not the Pew survey, the Pew Research Center survey that made the really big splash about, Republicans think that that higher education is leading the country in the wrong direction, is having a negative impact on the country. So not that survey. There was a survey that happened a little less than a year before that survey that said Republicans think that higher education actually everybody, but like they focus on Republicans, think that higher education prepares people well for the workforce, which I thought was interesting and sort of contradictory to what they were saying about leading the country in the wrong direction. There's a lot of contradictory public opinion about higher education that's been coming out lately that Manuela and I have spent a lot of time discussing, trying to figure out why that could be the case. We do also, along with this annual survey that we've been doing, we do some opportunistic polling every once in a while as topics come up. And one of the things so one of our opportunistic polls was last year during the election to look at higher education in the election and a lot of the higher education policies that the candidates were talking about, mostly Hillary Clinton, because Donald Trump did not have a lot of higher education policies. So we asked a lot about free college policies and refinancing debt. So in this year, now that the election's over, and there's not been a lot of higher education policy that's been discussed, we did do a recent poll about apprenticeship. So this is going back to your question about alternative ways to get the skills necessary for the workplace. So I mentioned our Center for Education and Skills at New America, and they focus on a bunch of things, including apprenticeship programs. And so we asked a few questions, and this data hasn't been published yet, but we did ask people, what is preferable between choosing like a 2-year college, a 4-year college, or an apprenticeship program for preparing for a job and getting the skills necessary to work in a job and a career. And so hopefully that we'll be able to publish that data soon. But we're excited about it because we are trying to go beyond the scope, as you've alluded to, beyond just seeing higher education and getting people to think about there are more options, more post-secondary options than what comes to mind of the traditional 2 or 4-year degree. There's lots of other ways to get a post-secondary education that will give you relevant skills for the workforce.
What a fantastic answer. And if I could just point backwards for a second, you draw really good connections between changes in the workforce versus changes in higher education. And this is something that a previous guest, Jeff Selinko, had a lot to say about. Manuela, do you want to add more to Rachel's really rich answer?
Yeah, I think the only other thing I'd add is that we did ask survey respondents about what they think higher education is supposed to provide. Like, is it a social good or is it mostly a private benefit? And most people landed on it being a social good. Some were obviously split, saying that we had the option to say both, that it's both a private good and a private benefit and a social good. And so I think it just kind of continues to show or reiterate that students and families see a college education as providing some economic or social benefit, which is why it's important to have.
Well, that's a really, really important distinction. I think lines up again with your the break between private, for-profit, and public. It also connects back again to Christopher Neufeld's argument about the shift in higher education, especially in public, going from seeing education as a public good to a private good. Tom, what a fantastic question. I need to pull you off the stage so we have more questions lined up, but thank you. And stay dry, stay dry. We have questions from Gardner Campbell. Gardner, if your audio is working, join us. If not, I'll do my best to read them out loud. And here's a text question. Gardner asks, I understand the survey approach, but I'm also interested in the philosophical approach. What do our guests believe ought to be the foundational mission of higher education, especially in a democracy? Oh, and I think, let's see if Gardner's mic is working. We need to have a dramatic way to play him in. Gardner, is your sound up?
I don't know. Is my sound up?
Your sound is beautiful. Welcome. What a great question.
Thanks.
Well, Manuela, why don't you take the lead in this? I'll put you on the spot. What do you think should be the purpose of higher education?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think it's something that we will continue to grapple with it. I don't think we'll ever land on a final answer about what is the purpose of higher education. What is it supposed to serve? What's its mission? What I find often troubling about when we try to answer that question is that we don't often include what students want. We tend to think that we know what they need, and we tend to not ask their opinion. But I think that philosophically, the purpose is really that there are some pillars or principles that we should always keep in mind, which is that it should be accessible, it should be open, it should be inclusive, it should be diverse. It should be constantly changing and open to change. So I think there are principles or foundations that I think most of us could agree on. But I don't think that anyone ever, at any point in time, will ever come to a point where we've answered that question definitively. I think there should be room to change how our approaches and to change our thinkings about what this system is supposed to do and who it's supposed to serve.
Now I've lost your audio, Brian.
Oh. How about now?
Oh, okay, that's good.
Those are very good themes. Oh, please, Carter, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and maybe this will build on some of what Manuela just said. In many respects, well, of course, first of all, I should say, I agree with you. The characteristics you've described, I hope would describe civil society generally. I would like to live in a world in which those qualities, those attributes were fully present across the board. But of course, higher education is not a restaurant. Higher education is not a government. Higher education is a specific kind of organization that has a mission that, while it should absolutely be informed by everything you said, is not the same as financial planning. It's not the same as sanitation. It's not the same. So you see where I'm going with this. I've often thought that the qualities or the attributes that you've just described, as laudable as they are, and they are absolutely essential, still don't get at the question of mission. And I would compare that to, let's say you went to your favorite restaurant, and then the next day the restaurant said, we now do financial planning. And then you go there the next day and it's like, hey, we've actually opened up a bank. So why don't you put your money here? We'll let you do financial planning and we'll eat. And then you go there the next day and it's like, and we have childcare because we need that. Okay. And we have a mortuary because we need that. Well, so you see my point. It's higher education is never going to have just one mission, I suppose. I can agree with that. But what is it that, let me ask the question a different way. What is it that would be, in your opinion, lost if, let's just say, the traditional 4-year undergraduate experience with some kind of liberal learning, some chance to work on an intellectual specialty, what do you think would be lost and maybe irretrievably lost from society if we don't have that anymore?
Who wants to tackle that one?
Jump in.
I mean, that would be a sad day in America. I think one of the most beautiful things about our system of higher education is that it does have diversity in mission. So it makes it also, it's like a blessing and a curse in a way, because it makes it so that, you have institutions that basically operate as like some residential 4-year schools as almost like a finishing school, where you have a wonderful residential experience where you're learning in a community of learners. I mean, it's like the most ideal experience. It's what most people, I think of when they think of higher education. They think of that residential 4-year experience. But then you have other institutions like community colleges that you have a lot of students that are commuting in. Most of them do not have residence halls. They have a totally different feel. Their mission is different than the or the students they serve are different than the students that are served by the residential 4-year sector. And so I just think that's sort of the beauty of the system. And I think there's a lot of different missions going on, but at the end of the day, it's about, being able to just, I don't know, navigate. I mean, this is a weighty question, right? I think if we don't want any sector to, I think, go away. I think less institutions does a disservice to who we're trying to serve, and maintaining an open pipeline to making sure that we have people engaged in lifelong learning. I will have a little caveat on there that, it would be bad if institutions close and students don't have access, but there are a lot of bad for-profits that have gone by the wayside that prey on students in that sector. I think that's a little bit of a different thing. Their mission, I think, is not to serve, not writ large, but I think a lot of these for-profits that have closed, that have defrauded students, their mission was to be focused on their shareholders and not students. So, but for the most part, higher education is about lifelong learning, and for anything to shut down would not be a good thing.
I did want to share one of my favorite quotes about education, and I think kind of captures what I believe should be the purpose or the mission of higher education. And it comes from Coretta Scott King. And she says, "I often wonder whether or not education is fulfilling its purpose. A great majority of the so-called education people do not think logically and scientifically. Even the press, the classroom, the platform, and the pulpit, in many instances, do not give us an objective and unbiased truth. To save man from the morass of propaganda, in my opinion, is one of the chief aims of education. Education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from fiction." And so I always go back to that, and I think about that when I think about questions about mission and philosophy.
Well,
Absolutely.
That's a great quotation, and I'm going to take a note on that because I need that to be present, in my environment, now. And if I could add, as a closing thought, because I want to get off the podium and let some other people on, of course. But I've got a student in my Milton class right now, so I've outed myself. I'm an English professor, I'm the wart on the useless part of the humanities, I guess, right? So I say that as a preemptive self-deprecation. I really think who would not want to be a Miltonist? I'm just going to put that out there. But I have a student in my class I'm going to teach at 5:30 this afternoon who started school several years ago. Her life went in a different direction. She decided after a while, really, she kind of wanted to finish what she started. So she actually works for this university now in healthcare. And because the university will pay for her to take classes, she's working full-time plus another part-time job. And can you believe this? She is taking a Milton class. What in the world is that about? And I guess I would add this as a kind of a postscript to Mrs. King's very stirring words that, Milton, it's for all of us, for the non-traditional student, for the community college student. I feel so strongly that, especially in a democracy, the idea is we all have access to all of the treasures of our culture. And it's hard to do that while you're also trying to schedule classes so people can take them and make it possible so they don't spend the rest of their lives and every bit of money they and their heirs and the signs will earn to be able to finish. But I just think, right, if that part goes away, if that non-traditional student or that community college student loses the opportunity to be exposed to whatever cultural riches, I think there are some besides Milton, I hear tell, that would just be a terrible thing and a kind of a betrayal of the promise of democracy itself. So anyway, thanks for that quotation. And absolutely, I know that the interwebs will give me that quotation and the source for it. So thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah,
Tweet it out, Parker. That's a great
that was
one.
great. Yeah.
We have
And I just say too, when it comes to liberal arts, you know, I think I have an opportunity, and Manuela does too. Like, we sit on lots of policy panels in DC, sort of like this, except, you know, downstairs in our event space. And we often talk about skills and the workforce, and how can we make sure people get the skills they need for the workforce in higher education. And I feel like a lot of these conversations, as they take place, they definitely have a sentiment of for thee and not for me. Like, would you send your own child to like, would I send my own child to a community college? Would I want them to do an apprenticeship program? Sure, like, it depends on what they look like. I know a lot about higher education. So actually, like, yes, if my child wanted to attend an apprenticeship program, I would promote that, or a community college, I would promote that. But I think about a lot of, like, my friends who would be like, no, my kid is going to, like, Harvard or Yale. And, you know, but community colleges, I love community colleges because they're doing hard work, but my child is not going to go there. And then I like to bring up on panels, and I've brought this up a few times, like, the liberal arts degrees get panned. They just get absolutely panned. Like, what would you do with a BA in English? I don't know. Like, a lot of people in the room in these Washington, D.C. events have a BA in English. I mean, my BA is in French. So I just want to point out that, you know, learning an interdisciplinary curriculum is really great. If a lot of the workforce skills that are necessary is being able to critically think, being able to communicate and write, all of which a liberal arts degree should be able to confer upon you upon graduation. You should have had a whole set of courses that help you to communicate better and to critically think. So I always like to point that out as well before we get too narrow in our discussions of preparing for the workforce. Yes, it's absolutely important to have lots of robust options, but it's also important to maintain the liberal arts degrees and make sure that people are able to have these debates. Yeah.
I have to agree, not only as a recovering English professor, but somebody who taught in liberal arts. I just want to quickly mention, we have two text questions that came up. Preston Davis asked, how do we access this report? This is valuable info. Is Varying Degrees the main URL people should use?
Yep, .org.
Okay, so varyingdegrees.org. And we've linked this out on Twitter, and we'll retweet it. But thank you again, Preston, for mentioning that. And Tom had a fantastic anecdote in the chat box. I just want to quickly read it. He said, quote, I was working a bond election a few years back, and one of the voters asked, I paid for my kids to go to college. Why should I pay for anyone else's? I replied, because your kids won't be the ones breaking into your house, unquote. So that's a whole other purpose for higher education right there. We have another question that's come up. Someone has a raised hand. Christopher, can we bring them up? Oh, excellent. Frederick Bashirs. Let's make sure that the mic and camera are working. Drum roll, please. Yes. Hello, Fred.
Can you hear me? Is my mic working?
Your mic is.
All right. So I guess my question relates a little bit to the previous one about the mission. And I should preface this. My experience was with an elite public school. I worked at UC Berkeley for 20 years in ed tech. And my question is, we certainly at Berkeley, we had the opportunity to expose our students to a very, culturally rich education. We have, great departments, but we also had very specialized professors. We also had, the adjunct professors, but we had very few what I would call polymath professors. And for an undergraduate education, when you had the senior faculty, the ones that really had job security and tenure or tenure track, they tended to be research faculty and hyper specialized, right? But for undergraduate education, I often wondered, do you really want a hyper specialized faculty teaching the undergraduates? And wouldn't it be better to have generalists, people who are actually trained to be, polymaths, so they could at least address a number of different disciplines simultaneously? And that would work well with online education, because you can get your lectures, if you really just need recorded lectures. I'm not saying that's what you really need, but obviously we can have recorded lectures on a vast variety of topics. But if you wanted to have a human contact, someone that could supplement the recorded lecture, you could offer a much wider variety of courses at even a small school, a community college, by offering those online MOOC type courses and then having Polymath professors that could provide a human contact with the students to encourage them to continue with their studies. So my question is, should we be looking at trying to encourage faculty to become Polymath professors as opposed to hyper-specialized professors? And how could that dovetail with our opportunities now with online education, where we can get specialized professors to create the textbooks and the recorded lectures and the other things? And we certainly didn't have that at Berkeley. At Berkeley, we had adjuncts and we had graduate students and we had highly specialized research faculty, but we had very few polymaths that weren't, some were just natural polymaths, but we didn't really emphasize the idea of polymath professors. So the question is, out of all that, is should we emphasize polymath professors? And the follow-up question is, could that be used with online education?
Good questions. Good questions. Rachel, Manuela?
Manuela, do you want to take a stab?
Yeah, sure. So I think that's a great question, an interesting question. I feel like the way PhD programs are currently structured, that you become become an expert in something really narrow. So it's like a narrow or deep expertise versus a wide expertise. And so I think that would need to change, the structure and nature of PhD programs, to produce scholars who are polymaths, who have wide-ranging expertise and knowledge in various fields. I also think in addition to that, we would need to emphasize interdisciplinary majors, which aren't things currently in the current craze around ensuring that we can exit higher education with skills that are relevant and are recognizable in order to get a job. That interdisciplinary studies or self-designed majors are like or English are like on the low on the totem pole. So we would need to shift our values. We would have to actually value folks who have wide expertise. It's constantly under attack, as I'm sure you know. So I think those two things we need to change. We would need to change how faculty are educated through PhD programs, and we would need to actually value and promote that kind of knowledge. In terms of whether or not it can, if that kind of instruction could be delivered via education or online education, I don't see why it couldn't. We currently use those platforms and those modalities for other fields. I don't see why that couldn't. But again, I do think those first two things would have to change, which is, again, promotion of interdisciplinary studies and the change in the way we educate scholars.
And I think for it to really take root, just following up with what Manuela said, is that I think, again, with the educating scholars, it would have to be like, this would have to happen at the prestigious, like UC Berkeley level, like Stanford levels, because otherwise it's just going to be seen, for it to be as successful as it sounds like you would like it to be. Otherwise, I think it's just going to be seen as a less prestigious way to receive education. And I think we run into this problem, like I was describing before, where people are like, that's a great option, but not for my child. Like, I still want to send my child to this traditional experience, but that's great for someone else. And so it's like, you want it to be aspirational. And in order for it to be aspirational, it would have to happen at that level to be successful, I think.
Well, this is a fantastic question, Fred. Thank you. Please go ahead.
One other point that I make, that people have sort of forgotten about MOOCs, and maybe rightfully so. But one of the schools that tried to embrace the MOOC idea was Antioch, And they were one of the few schools that were, at least recognizable in my mind, that were saying, well, we will give credit for these MOOC courses. Our students here at Antioch can take the course, and we'll give college credit for it. And one of the reasons I got thinking about the polymath professor idea was that if you're teaching at a small school, a community college, for instance, how can you have professors that could oversee the MOOC and determine if the students have really learned so that it really is justifiable. So at a small school, at a community college, if you had more polymath kind of professors, then they may be in a better position to oversee the learning of the students who are taking these MOOCs, to determine if the school should be giving credit for that course without having to have a PhD in that particular subject. So that way you could have, you could avail yourself, or the school could avail itself of the wide variety of courses that are going to be out there online, and without having to have professors that, teach in all those areas. At Berkeley, we had a vast variety of specialist professors, so we could do it, but, few schools could afford to do what Berkeley does. And so I was just thinking how you could make, through online education, how you could make all that great diversity, exposure to cultural richness and a great diversity of educational opportunities available to students who go to a relatively small school with a relatively small number of professors. So that was the reason why I got thinking about the polymath professor idea in the first place. But as you say, very few people recognize the idea of a polymath professor as something that education should be trying to produce in the first place.
Yes, and that brings us back to access. But before we lose track of this, I want to bring up a question that came on via Twitter, and this came from longstanding forum stalwart George Station out in California, and he asks, how can predictive analytics be used constructively in higher education without trashing or disregarding the qualitative aspects of research?
That's an interesting question. So what's funny is that the public opinion research that I do, Rachel Fishman, is the way public opinion research is designed or carried out, that it does both qualitative research, there's focus groups, and other things, as well as the quantitative, which is when you're calling cell phones or calling landlines to get folks' opinion about various things. The qualitative piece about predictive analytics comes up a lot. It's something that we here in New America have talked about in our reports. If you go online, so my colleague Iris Palmer and I published last fall the Performance and Peril Predictive Analytics in Higher Education, a landscape analysis where we talked about thinking about the robustness of the kinds of and the quality of the data that are being used to create these predictive models, and for institutions to think about what role qualitative data would play in assessing whether or not a student is at risk, or assessing whether or not a student is gaining mastery of a particular content in a course. I don't think we've landed, or that debate is closed. I think it's still open, but it's something we've addressed, or at least highlighted, to say that this is something of importance, because we know that no one data point can tell you a full story.
Right.
And we shouldn't rely heavily on quantitative data at the expense of qualitative.
Oh, that's a rich answer. Thank you. I wanted to grab that question, not just because it's a juicy question, and not just because it shows that we have this good dialogue happening on Twitter, but because this also points to the end of your report, which I haven't seen people discuss very much. So I want to bring it up there. I mean, it's always incumbent upon us when we identify problems to posit solutions, and you have a whole raft of solutions ranging from, say, expanded financial aid to considering universal basic income to expanding state support, federal block grants, online learning. So that's one direction, Fred, to pursue. Growing scholarship of pedagogy for evidence of methods. And you even go back to echoing Professor Sarah Goldrick-Rabb, who recommended that we expand federal lunch to higher education not just limited to secondary school. That's a fantastic set of recommendations. And I have to ask you, since you're in DC, what are the chances the next few years that we'll see any federal action on these? Or is our best bet waiting for states to do things?
I mean, it's a good question. I think higher education is sort of like, I mean, at the very bottom of things that we should be, unfortunately, like worried about in federal policy making right now. There's just a lot, obviously, going on with this administration. And honestly, I think my fear is that the next few years with the current administration and Republicans also in power in Congress, in terms of access, success, and equity of students, which we're focused on here at New America, I think a lot of our focus federally is going to be to prevent bad things from happening, like, you know, the Pell Grant not continuing to rise with inflation that expired this year. There's been some concerning trends with the hiring of basically like somebody from DeVry to work on overseeing institutions at the education department. So I think from where we sit, a lot of work likely over at least the next couple of years is going to be focused, yes, on promoting good policy, but also making sure what good policy is that's in place continues to be in place, and that we continue to fight on behalf of students. I think there's a lot of interesting things going on at the state level. And I remember as soon as Donald Trump was elected president, I was basically like, well, there goes free college. But it's important to remember that free college still lives on, and we've had a nuanced free college blog series. You can go on to our blog at central.org and read more about our where we stand on free college. We're a bit nuanced on it, but as far as I'm concerned, free college is continuing. It's just continuing at the state level, the state and local levels, and so a lot of work can be done at the state and local levels, and I think that's where we're likely to see a lot of movement in the coming years.
For a forum dedicated to the future of education, that's a really, really useful pointer for looking ahead. Friends, we have time for one last question. And if I've missed someone that has one, please let me know. We have, this is Mark Corbett Wilson. Hello, Mark. Mark asks, with college graduates in charge as our economy, healthcare, housing, education, democracy are in crisis, what is an educated person? And how do they contribute to our society? Manuela and Rachel, your report has just triggered the most fundamental questions from the forum audience. That says a lot to what you've done.
I mean, these are weighty questions. It is true too, because when Manuela and I were writing the recommendation section, as you pointed out, Brian, we like touched upon everything from financial aid to making sure we had evidence-based practices. On the cutting room floor is an entire section Manuela worked on that was looking at the workforce, and we were just like, oh my gosh, our recommendations are like twice as long as the paper. So we're hoping to continue the drumbeat by publishing more on the workforce side of things on our blog. I have another blog coming out. But I think, again, this goes to the mission and purpose of higher education. It's so varied that it's hard to say what exactly an educated person in this society looks like. And I will refer back to the comment that that Manuela said from Coretta Scott King, and I think that helps to answer some of it. But I don't. Moving forward, I don't know. Like, it is clear that we need more highly educated people moving forward. I think the good news out of our survey is that people understand that regardless of party affiliation, like they value a higher education. It's just figuring out how higher education can work better for everyone and be affordable and accessible.
Rachel, what a great answer. Manuela, you get the last shot. Do you have any other parting words for us, either in answer to that question or in response to our discussion overall?
Not really. I think Rachel summed it up really good, and I would also go back to the question that Gardner posed to us in the responses we gave, which is that I don't think what an educated person is. There are some fundamental things that I think most of us can agree on, but I think what that looks like, as Rachel says, will change as our society changes, as our economies change. The skills that were required 10 years ago are very different from the skills that are required today, and the skills that may be required 10 years from now. So I think we have to be open and open-minded and be willing to be flexible to change and to meet the needs of today and of the future.
Well, and I think that's well said. And to be flexible, it really helps to have the guidance of people in your team at New America. Thank you both so much. You've shared a terrific report and a generous amount of conversation on top of that. We're past the end of our time, so we have to let you go. But again, Rachel and Manuela, I want to thank you both so much. Thank you again.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Well, for next week, let me just remind you that we are continuing with our series, and we have a few things that just put on the table. One is that next week we have an unusual session. It's back to school. It's our first September session. So we'd like to have a community gathering without one single guest, but with all of you, to talk about what the major issues you see impacting higher education over the next academic year. So you've come back from summer, classes have started, the research calendar is at full tilt. What are the issues that you see coming up? So why don't you bring your back to school boxes, your thoughts, your reflections, your coffee, and bring that all to next week so we can carry on. Now, if we have more questions to answer, if we have more debates to follow, there are a few places you can go. One is go to ftte.us to learn more about the report. You go to shindig.com to check out this technology. Naturally, you can find me on Twitter and on the blogosphere with these links. Let me thank everybody for such deep, thoughtful, and passionate questions. It's always a privilege to host you, and I'm delighted to learn from all of you, to learn with you. So in the meantime, stay tuned, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.